Covent Garden, one of the busiest and most colourful places you can be within London. But not too far from the bustling market is a series of buildings you might just overlook. I'm Bob Currie, and today we're going to take a walk around the block. I'm here in Drury Lane Gardens, a burial ground in the 1870s and on the road most famous for being home of the Muffin Man and the children's nursery rhyme. Today's route is a large-sized block of buildings in Westminster compiled of Drury Lane, Russell Street, Bow Street and Long Acre. My mission is to show you how just 4 simple streets can be packed to the brim with culture and history. We start here on Drury Lane, home to the first ever Sainsbury's shop, which was opened in 1869. And this building, not technically on this block, was opened down there 173 Drury Lane. Now in 1869 there were approximately 100 shops on this street, and of them about 49 were food stores, so J Sainsbury's would really have to stand out. Now this shop really stood out to the Victorian people because it was a higher quality shop than many in the area, boasting tiled walls and mosaic flooring as well as marble counters, none of which would be seen in many other shops. Now fortunately the trading method of this shop went so well that in 1873 they opened another shop in Kentish Town. The original shop, however, was bombed during the Second World War and has since been replaced by the New London Theatre, down this end, most commonly known for its production of The War Horse. But back on the block, immediately next to the Drury Lane Gardens, is a building known simply as The Cottage. This building would have been the watch house for the gardens when they still would have been a burial ground to ensure that no body smugglers could take a body from the grounds. Charles Dickens once wrote that over 1,000 bodies were buried here, and at one point the site would have been significantly bigger. However, to build the buildings that were surrounding the area, they had to make the site smaller. This particular burial ground was most commonly referred to as one of the worst burial grounds in London. Many people would call it appalling. In 1877 though, it was turned into a public space and has been managed since by the St Martin in the Fields Vestry. So on the other side of the gate we have the mortuary chapel, which is where the bodies would have been kept before being buried in the burial grounds. In the later years of the burial ground, so many bodies were buried here that you couldn't possibly bury someone else without disturbing another. Nowadays it boasts a large children's play park and a sports court, something a bit different to what would have been here 200 years ago. Now just a short walk up from the park we have the Sheridan, Fletcher and Beaumont buildings. This here is the Sheridan building. It was built in the early 1900s as the Duke of Bedford needed a way of rehousing the poor after we refurbished the area. Now the name of the building could come from Sir Richard Brinsley Sheridan, a playwright who wrote The Rivals, and in 1755 it was performed at the Covent Garden Theatre. Now something you might notice about this building in particular is its incredible pipework on the outside. Now in the Victorian and Edwardian eras it would have been quite hard to get water into an individual apartment, which is why most of the pipework is done on the outside and would have to be feeding in this way. This means that the pipeworks would often have to cross over each other in order to get to the individual apartments that it's needed. We now move into Russell Street, which is south of Drury Lane. As you walk into this street you'll notice that one entire side of it is taken up by the Theatre Royal Drury Lane. But however, we're going to try and focus on this side of the street. Now as you turn in from Drury Lane you're met with this rather standard 1980s renovated office block. Now chances are this was a bomb site in the Second World War, as old maps show a row of flat-faced Victorian cottages. Now these would have had courtyards in the back which would have led to the actual court itself, as well as just a standard shop front as well. Among plans for this building to be turned into a restaurant, there's nothing that particularly special about it. This building here is built on the site where the Albion Tavern once stood, a tavern attended primarily by Victorian and Edwardian actors. The site was acquired by playwright Lawrence Cohen, who asked architect Ernest Schwelfelberg to design a new theatre, which was built between 1922 and 1924, and in August that year opened as the Fortune Thriller Theatre. Currently it is the oldest standing building in London, with concrete as the primary building material after the demolition of the original Wembley Stadium. In the 1960s the theatre was refurbished and now has a total of 432 seats, still nothing compared to the 2,196 seats over the road. As you continue onwards you might overlook this little doorway here, which is the entrance to the Church of Scotland Crown Court. This church was set up when the followers of the King of Scotland continued down to London to the city to worship in 1603. Some sources will say that they started off worshipping in a building which would later become Great Scotland Yard in Whitehall. Now the original building was replaced in 1909 by the current one, and in the 1920s it was merged with the theatre building to my right here. Immediately next to the church we have this rather nondescript building, and behind its high walls and stained grey windows we have the Covent Garden Telephone Exchange. Now this building has served as that purpose for about 30 years, possibly longer, and it's unknown what it would have been before this one. However, in the 1930s maps show that this used to be an open public space, so it could have been a large courtyard or a park. The Covent Garden Telephone Exchange actually serves over 2,000 personal properties and 2,000 commercial properties. Next on the block is Bow Street, which was constructed in the 1630s and over history has held many important and famous buildings. By 1780, The street had 8 pubs, many of which actually contained brothels as well, leading the street to have a reputation for pornography. However, in today's Bow Street, none of that still exists.
This corner building is shared by both Russell Street and Bow Street, being the pub and restaurant The Marquis of Anglesey. It has been a licensed premises since 1663, when it was known as the Edward Miles Coffee House. After that name it changed to the Barley Mow in 1752, the Green Man in 1755, and from 1815 it became the Marquis of Anglesey. It wasn't until 1979 that the name was corrected to its current form. Unfortunately, just like Drury House at the other end of Russell Street, it suffered bomb damage in the Second World War and had to be partially rebuilt to the building it is today. Immediately next door we have the Globe Pub. This building was built in its current form in the 1930s and has undergone a lot of renovation in recent years. It has been used as a tavern since at least 1839, and the first account of a victualler residing here goes back to 1682.
Now, something you can't miss when you walk down Bow Street is the Royal Opera House, which stands behind me. Now, this building that you see behind me is actually the 4th variation of the building, as all versions before have been damaged by fire. The main glass part we see here was actually part of the Covent Garden Flower Market, and that's why it's most commonly referred to as the Floral Hall. It was added on in the 1990s redevelopment of the building and now serves as the main public area for anyone visiting the theatre. But back on this side of the road we encounter a building that's played a very important part in history. The sign above the door says police station, but it's actually part of a much bigger complex. In 1740, Bow Street had its first court established when Colonel Sir Thomas de Vere stood as magistrate in his own home, which was an acting court. In 1747, he would be replaced by Sir Henry Fielding, the man who would go on to create London's first organised police force, the Bow Street Runners. In 1829, the Metropolitan Police was established, and because of this, it was ordered that a station be built at number 27 and number 29 Bow Street. Almost 50 years later, the Duke of Bedford finally allowed for another building to be built, where the current one stands. Building on this building began in 1878 and was completed in 1881. Now, the sign above the door says it was completed in 1879, however, this was actually just the date they wanted it to be finished by. The building was in use for over 100 years, but in 2006 closed its doors for the last time. There were 2 main reasons for its closure. The first being that most cases were sent to the Crown Court, and the second being that the location of Covent Garden wasn't really great. Covent Garden is a very commercialised area, whereas in Georgian London this was not the case and was easier to get to. In 2005 there were plans to turn it into a boutique hotel, but these plans never went ahead. In 2008, however, it was sold to Austrian developers to create a World Police Museum. These plans also never went forward, but in April 2015 plans finally went ahead to turn it into a hotel. Now, as you look up and down Bow Street, you might not think this was actually the place where the Battle of Bow Street took place. The name does sound a bit more than it actually was, though, as no imperial battle actually took place here. In 1919, 3 American soldiers were caught by police playing a game of dice in the street. Now, the police advised them that what they were doing was illegal, but the soldiers retaliated by saying to the police that they'd won the war for the British and were going to do what they wanted. After the police placed all the soldiers under arrest, a large crowd gathered and a riot began. The police were obviously outnumbered now, so called for backup using their police whistles. In the following riot, many servicemen were actually struck by truncheons, including a corporal who said he could try and control the situation. However, the police suspected him of going to draw a firearm, so struck him down instead. Still outnumbered though, the police fought their way back to Bow Street Station, where they took their prisoners with them. Later that night, rumours began circulating the colonel had died in police custody, and in retaliation to this, the people in the street began to throw stones and bricks at the police station, meaning that in the night the street had to be cleared by mounted officers. A total of 30 servicemen were arrested for rioting. We now move on to Long Acre, a street completed in the 17th century which hosts Covent Garden Tube Station. Now, this street was once famous for its production of coaches and cars and other vehicles and motor transport. But just across the street here we have BobCorp. Now, this block that we've been walking around each has a central court in the middle, and all the individual roads on the streets lead up. These walkways have been here for many years, and it's even a possibility that in the 1890s BobCorp, the one that runs along the back of here, was actually a single road itself. BobCorp is mainly apartments, but also features the Fielding Hotel, named after Henry Fielding, of whom we talked about earlier. BobCorp also features a large square in the centre, which has been here since the 1860s, but with the recent residential developments at Beaumont, Fletcher and Sheridan buildings, these are now private. Back across the road, we come to this small pub here, which you might expect to have some sort of Victorian or Romanian heritage due to its facade. However, this design has actually only been in place since since about 2011. This building though has seen a pub on it since 1839, all of which have been known as the Sun. It is thought that it could have been a fire hall, but because the London Fire Brigade was set up 26 years after records began of a pub being here, this is highly unlikely. Now this building here is 90 Long Acre and was constructed by Richard Seifert in the 1980s. Surprisingly, it wasn't actually a bomb site from the Second World War, and it was actually more that the area just needed a desperate refurbishment. This particular building takes up the entire block, so doing this sort of thing on these streets wouldn't be as interesting. The building serves as a multi-purpose or multi-company office building and serves actually up to 137 companies, all within its towers.
Moving along, we have these tall rounded windows. As I've mentioned previously, Long Acre was well known for its production of coaches and cars, so this type of building would have been a showroom for the vehicles. Today, no businesses to do with this type of vehicular trade survive in Long Acre, and many have been turned into clothing stores, apartments and office spaces. As we approach the end of our walk, we reach Acre House, and if you look carefully above these doors, you can spot a small green plaque. This particular plaque is dedicated to Dennis Johnson. Johnson was a pioneer in the production of bicycles, and from 1818 had a workshop at this location. One of the products that was manufactured and sold here was the Dandy Horse bicycle. A bicycle without pedals which you had to push along with your feet. Nowadays the building still sells bicycles but under a different name and company. And just like that, we've reached the end of our tour, doing a full walk of the block. It really does go to show just how much history exists around us every day and how easy it is to miss. So next time you're out and about, always be sure to look around and see what you can discover. Even without masses of research and knowledge, you'd be surprised what you can learn about something, just by taking a look at it.